they're saying, but why does that one guy have a halo?
As long as you didn't put pitchfork behind me. Which might be warranted, depending on the day.
You all ever see the fantastic Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Yes.
Fabulous.
Yeah. I watched it again the other night, and I will never get tired of that. It's only 3 times now, but the glowing, it says to the Meryl Streep, "You're glowing," and she is. It's a lovely rendering there, and you're glowing.
Love it.
Hey, Jill. Can you do me a favor and get some pictures and stuff when people are... Okay, and of the crowd, too. I'm thinking your snark about they should have given us one of the Neapolitan sessions. I have no idea. Okay.
It's not.
It may be for a previous thing or something.
They put these reserved table tents on things.
I wonder if it's for accessibility purposes. I don't know. Okay.
So, do you see a lot of consortial people
I
here?
do.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't know, you see.
And there's a bunch of people who are in governance in their consortia too. I've seen several of those folks. Although I can't see that far back, so I can tell you what's in the back. Yeah, so Pascal's here, Link is here. Some Palsy folks. Lauren in the middle. Who else did I see walk in? I'm trying to remember. I think Jenya was going to come from Viva.
See that?
Hello.
See the guy just waved back to me?
We have 11:15, so to get started on time, we will move forward. Thank you all very much for taking time to come to Consortial Futures. Where will Library Consortia go next? Our agenda for today is to talk with these 3 fine executive directors of Consortia. They will introduce themselves here in just a moment. Very quickly, my name is Jill Grogg. I'm a senior strategist with the Content and Scholarly Communication Initiatives team at Lyrasis. We will have some time at the end of the session for questions. Please use the microphone for the questions. So we have one up front here for you to be able to use so that we can capture that for the recording. So with that, we will get started. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves very briefly and their consortia. So we will start with Kirsten Leonard.
All right. I'm Kirsten Leonard, the Executive Director of the Private Academic Library Network of Indiana, PALNI, which is a much better acronym than what they originally came up with, which was PANIC, but there are times where we want to bring that back to the table. We are a 501c3 that supports 24 small private academic libraries located throughout Indiana. In that mix, we have 3 Oberlin schools, Earlham, DePauw, and Wabash colleges, 4 seminaries, and the remaining schools are primarily undergraduate liberal arts colleges that are also expanding now into health sciences and distance learning. Most of the schools are under 1,000 FTE. All of the library directors sit on our board as the nonprofit, and they are the fiduciaries on this board, so they have the decision-making of the organization. With our geographic closeness and similar missions and sizes, PALNI libraries have committed to what we call deep collaboration to scale resources, build expertise, and enabling the institutions to provide impactful systems and services much more economically. So we have now moved to having 6 centrally located full-time staff members, but we have 11 coordinators that are actually really the powerhouse of what happens in PALNI, who are located in our individual institutions or have been part of our PALNI institutions that keep us accountable to what's going on in the campus and leverage scale at a much higher level. They also help us retain talented folks within our organization. PALNI, every functional area has a group to learn, share, et cetera, work on problems together. And those library staff are the most important part of any of our libraries, right? It's the staff expertise. We have many shared systems and technologies and ILS and IR, proxy server, et cetera, some licensing and some other contract services and grant pursuits. The 5-second elevator speech, which I probably should have just done in this case since we've got limited time, but anyway, is that PALNI supports all of the areas. PALNI people support all of the areas of information services, anything that you can imagine now and later. But the key aspects are that we share great people and ideas, resources, and risk as we move forward. So, thank you.
Excellent. So I'm Maurice York. I am the Director of Library Initiatives for the Big Ten Academic Alliance. The Big Ten Academic Alliance is a consortium of Research One universities that comprehends much more than the libraries. There are immense collaborations across all sorts of research and teaching initiatives and programs across the universities. So Chief Information Officers, Arts and Sciences Deans, Grad Deans, the Provosts are our board at the top level. So the libraries within the Big Ten Academic Alliance are one of the groups that co-invest the most on all nature of things from contracts to shared infrastructure, programs such as accessibility and things like that. We have been around for 65 years now. You may have formerly known us as the Committee on Institutional Cooperation, which is a name that inspired no one. And we were very pleased to change that to the Big Ten Academic Alliance about 10 years ago. So if you're familiar with sports at all, we are the same universities as the Big Ten Sports Conference, but we're over on the academic side. And our central strategic initiative for the libraries now is the Big Collection, which is uniting all of our separate collections into one collection that is shared and fully networked. A complete paradigm shift from separate libraries that share a limited scope of materials with each other to joint stewards of a single geographically distributed collection. That is, the shift towards that took us 55 years to reach. We kept, I had the report on my desk back in 1964, started thinking about what could we do at scale, what are the opportunities that we have as libraries and how could we leverage that. We continued, returned to that decade after decade, came at it from different directions, and in 2019, the library deans got together and said, what are we really working towards here? I think what we're trying to do is actually unite the collections, and that became a new strategic, very important center for us, and we're just a few years now into that sort of decade, multi-decade making shift and moving forward with that. So that's who we are.
Great. Hi, I'm John Wilkin. I'm the CEO of Lyrasis. And before I get started, I know I speak for all of us because we were talking about this. Thank you all for coming out. It's great to see a full room. I worried we'd have 10 or 12 people, or maybe 3, listening to the 3 of us. So this is really nice to see. I've been in my position for almost a year. December 1st, it'll be a year. Lyrasis is a member-based nonprofit, 501c3, delivering services to libraries, archives, and museums. We are of and for our members through our work, through our mission, through our governance. You all may know we have consortial roots. We formed through the amalgamation of several large consortia, but at this point we have over 1,000 members, and unlike Kirsten or Maurice, it would be impossible, of course, to have those members sit on our board, so we have representatives from the members. I'd like to think that at this point we serve as a sort of national scale infrastructure with things like ORCID US, DSpace, Archive Space in what we're doing. But we are also importantly situated in an ecosystem that works with and complements other consortia. I want to bring to your attention essentially our 3 areas of work, the primary areas of work in addition to member services. A core part of our work continues to be licensing at a very large scale, but with an eye toward building OA futures, things like ORCID and OA ICP in that work. The other areas are in supportive community-supported technologies, also referred to as CSPs, things like Archive Space, DSpace. We are the fiscal home for those activities. They have complete autonomy, but we provide them with the infrastructure services. And in close alliance with that, we use those technologies to provide services to the community. So for example, we host Archive Space as well in a very, very separate way, clearly separate from the governance process, and have over 500 institutions that take part, that use that service. DSpace, we're building out our repository services. So that's the second area. The third is in a library-centric ebook licensing and delivery platform, Palace and Bibliolabs. I'll say a little bit more about that later, but trying to restore a little bit of the balance for libraries and readers in that space. So 3 areas: licensing as a bridge to OA, community support technologies and allied hosting services, and this library-based ebook platform.
Thank you all very much. So with that, we'll move into some of our questions. And the first question is, what kinds of pressures are member institutions facing, which is a lot of us in the room, obviously, that Consortia can help to address, and what are the ways in which Consortia are addressing such pressures in the future? In addition, this could also include internal challenges that Consortia themselves are facing. And we'll start that question with John.
So I want to start out in a slightly more generic way, and as much as anything, set things up for Kirsten and Maurice, because there is a lot of complementarity in what happens in response to that pressures message, and we all work together very closely in trying to address those pressures. And so with that in mind, I want to say individual libraries are facing myriad pressures. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Fiscal pressures, legal pressures, regulatory pressures, staffing pressures, but ultimately, most importantly, the pressure to serve the institution that they're a part of, to address those needs, to have impact for that institution. Those pressures may sound the same, but they manifest in very, very different ways in these different contexts. And they look differently to different institutions. So Kirsten has institutions that are dealing with financial pressures that put them on the brink of collapse. And the financial pressures for the R1s in the Big Ten Academic Alliance are no less real, but it's a very different kind of result for those pressures. Always, those pressures can be mitigated through collective action, and that's where this conversation comes into play, through consortial action. Collective action can mean different things in different contexts. Regional collective action in a state, for example, can foreground state issues and bring state resources to bear. Type institution pressures, R1s in Maurice's case, can bring those institutions together around the types of solutions that address those things. And always there is this issue of how generalizable the problems and the solutions are. As Consortia, we tune our actions and responses to these kinds of considerations, the considerations of the context that we're dealing with, and how generalizable those problems are. For Lyrasis, This means working at a national and sometimes international scale to address technological challenges by bringing or parlaying member innovation into generalized systems. This is what we do. We sort of bring that to the fore and find ways to coordinate that, or address fiscal pressures through large-scale licensing in ways that can meet very heterogeneous needs. I want to note that throughout my career, I've advocated for at-scale solutions, and sometimes people have taken that as there should be one solution at a national level or an international level, and clearly that is not the case. Scale means different things for different problems in different contexts, and thus the complementarity of what we do and what you do in these consortial spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, here. I would say that is definitely the case. So PALNI, 24 small colleges in the Midwest. I start out with this, let me tell you our tale of woe, right? I think many people in the Northeast and the Midwest are facing some pretty existential challenges, both to the models for their institutions as well as what the library means. So certainly budgets, declining library budgets and declining staffing levels have been a dramatic challenge that we've faced. We have a few PALNI schools who have lost as much as 35% of their FTE since 2018, pre-conference. So these are not minor decreases, these are large decreases. And those that are growing happen to do that through mergers or completely changing focus from liberal arts to something else, which means it puts a considerable additional pressure on the library, usually without any additional funding in that place. The library just happens to be a convenient target for schools that need to reduce big numbers, right? So they go to the library, and us as service-orientated, who are part of making our institutions survive, sometimes struggle to push back against that. So that means right now we need to respond to these challenges in more than just incremental. This is not pushing back from a 7 to a 3%. This is fundamentally rethinking about how we work together in order to be strong going into the future. One of the other things that we've done, frankly, just along these lines, is that we've invested in a shared strategic communications director who both messages the value of the staff that are in the library as well as the library. So it's not just for PALNI, right? It's for the 24 schools. The other part that she does is crisis management, both in terms of what may happen in the library as well as what are those pressures when somebody comes and says, hey, we need to reduce your budget by 20%. You need to come up with an argument tomorrow, which has happened on multiple occasions. So it's a very different space than it has been. So having that person who can help elevate and realign, because the changing nature of what library services are has been a critical component. So we've talked about what happens beyond DEEP. So we've been doing DEEP since 2016. Deeper collaboration, we've even moved into that. What do we call this next phase of where we even need to do more together? Ultimate, I don't know, collaboration, I'm not sure what the term is going to be there. The one other thing I just want to say is that point about it's difficult to get providers to see that we are fundamentally different than we were. Those that want to look at an increase over the years are not seeing that we've shrunk considerably. The other thing I want to say too is that most providers only have a bottom tier that's 5,000 FTEs. When our schools are tuition driven, FTE focused, and we have some as small as 100 FTE paying the same price as a 5,000 FTE, it's not sustainable. This model is broken for small schools. So we need to fundamentally think differently about it. One other thing, in terms of where we're going with this is this idea as well of the collective collection in terms of sharing staff to manage it, but to reframe where we are and what we need to be doing going forward. The other part of this is morale in our institutions, and recruitment in some of our institutions is challenging. Some are better than others. We're sharing tips. We share leadership across all of the schools, get together often with our directors to share how are you positioning this, how are you defending it in terms of your institution. So that closeness is becoming even more imperative, akin to perhaps the mergers, but retaining that local library impact, the library director as the key point to that. But what can we share that gives us the scale at that appropriate level? I'll say the other part of that is this trying to communicate this message quite clearly, working with other consortia to do that. My hat is off to the consortia member of another consortia who described the environment as the boiling frog. That we have been incrementally moving along in this focus, and as I said, the business model is broken at this point. We need to find another direction. So, over to you, Maurice.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to kind of pick up on a couple of things that both of you talked about. I really appreciate that metaphor of the boiling frog. I think the challenges that consortia can help our members with, and just to pick up on that one, that I get these proposals all the time, right? From vendors, from publishers, from various commercial entities in the space that sort of view us as a convenient aggregating point for a group of individuals, and come in and break down the prices and this person this and so forth, and these lead to very unfair and inequitable models that just cannot be the basis for where we go in the future. Consortia have the potential to be very powerful in the US. We're predisposed to working at the network level, to working in the spirit of collective action. I mentioned the big collection a little earlier. The premise of the big collection is not that we join all the stuff we have into one big pot and we all do the same thing. It is that the premise that the pressures, and John, you mentioned the legal, the fiscal, all of the other pressures are facing individually as institutions, that what we're seeing is that it is increasingly difficult, and if not impossible, for each individual member to be all things to its campus, right? To run the scale of services, to dive deeply, and we are research libraries, right? To focus on the distinctive, on the individual, on the local needs. Those are what members are really good at. What we can do at the consortial level is tackle the kinds of issues that are too large for any one institution to take on anymore, or even any one small group. That's why we were created, actually, was to tackle things at the network level that are too big for any one of the individuals to take on. The challenge is, we're, as consortia, kind of understandably rooted in a lot of our buying club past, and I don't say that to be a pejorative. There's a lot of power in that. We've all saved a lot of money together. We've done a lot of good things together. The question, I think, in front of our members is that all of the business models are shifting. Everything is changing. So to the extent which we look at the consortia and say, why were we created in the first place? And how do we need to change? How do we need to be enabled to change to move along with our members and with our institutions? Because if we're rooted in business models of the last 20 years, while all of our members are shifting and changing around us, we can no longer keep up, and we can no longer be in that magnifying power that we have been for so long. We're often asked to tackle very large, very complex, very expensive problems, right? Things like open knowledge, things like equitable and sustainable, scalable scholarly communications, shared collections, the collective collection, digital accessibility in increasingly digital world, and yet, we're asked to take up these things on the edges of those traditional jobs at the center, where often the metric that comes back at the end of the year is what we're judged by, right? How much money have you saved this year? What have you saved us, That's not an unimportant metric. It's very important, but the scale and complexity of these problems suggest to me that we need to introduce a wider range of metrics into the picture. We need new ways of gauging our performance, the return on investment that we deliver, the kind of value that we have for the investments that we're asked to make, so that really the consortia can be, I say in a sense, unleashed to help our members tackle these problems that were being turned towards. It's very natural to turn towards us to tackle these questions because that's what we're good at. We're good at thinking at the network and at the scale level, and I think that's where we can really deliver incredible value as we're moving forward into the future.
Thank you so much. So I just tripped. We'll move into question number 2. What do you see as strategic program areas for Consortia to grow toward? Conversely, what do you see as areas of decreasing focus in the future? This could include, for example, powerful and emerging opportunities and examples of collaboration across Consortia. And with that, we'll start with Maurice.
Okay, thank you. Well, so perhaps I'll pick up the thread of thoughts where I was before, and we could sort of keep building this conversation. Strategic areas for the future. I believe deeply that power lives in the networks. You know, power lives in the community broadly, in the communities of communities that we have. Consortia have the potential to be significant players, right, in our ability not just to transform our own space, but to change the business models, you know, to change the kind of opportunities that are coming to our institutions, to be able to tackle problems, frankly, at the level of the networks of networks. So one of the things that's quite wonderful about Consortia is I don't really see a future in which we're all consolidated into one massive, you know, national consortia. In the US, the consortia deliver value because of their regional focus. The institutions deliver value because they're very close to and turned towards the needs of their campuses. So it's a picture of, so I'll give an example here. California Digital Library and Big Ten Academic Alliance were very close partners on the question of the open future, of how we move into that, of how we shift from the business models of the traditional, you know, models we've had for the last 20, 30 years into the open future. One of the truths that we've learned is that there are things that work in California that don't translate at all to the Big Ten. There are things we can do in the Big Ten that don't work at all in California. It's not a question of trying to find one model that works in all places. It's a question of saying, what is tuned most carefully to our regions, to our members, to our partners, to the dynamics of the politics, the economics, everything else of where we're working, and to say, how can we align and work on the super regional problems, the things that none of us can even tackle within our own context, but have to be joined together at a national level. The US is very particular in this respect. Consortia here don't work at all like they do in Europe, for instance. We're very disaggregated, very separated, and I think the extent to which our the players in our ecosystem can leverage the fact that we're separated and distributed, and in many sense we're kind of created to be in competition with each other, is a disadvantage. It's a legacy of the past that we have to move past. And it is our responsibility, and it's within our scope and our power to not be in competition anymore. That's us, right? That's nobody else. It's all on us. So I really think, and maybe Kirsten and John can speak a little more to the specific areas that we can grow into and focus, but I guess I was floating at that high level already and wanted to kind of set up that picture.
From the Lyrasis perspective, I want to focus on 3 areas, and I'm focused primarily on growth here, but there is a sort of flip side on all of these. And so the first I will highlight is that if indeed licensing will be increasingly supplanted by OA, then we need vehicles for collective action that align with different consortial contexts and enable the members of the consortia, the individual institutions, and the consortia as collectives to collaborate to build those futures. So it's a very specific example, Diamond OA. Right now, it's one of those let's let 1,000 flowers bloom, very scattered, uncoordinated efforts. It's going to be very important for us, if we want this to work, to convene and to support scaled, coordinated efforts to vet, to fund, to make people aware of, to promulgate information that can work. And it can bring those Diamond OA efforts that are scattered and disaggregated into a more powerful context, and can bring our focus to bear on making those things much more successful. So that's the first. And it's really about that complementarity between licensing, which continues to be important, and building a future for OA. The second area I'll focus on is in technological solutions that scale to address challenges and allow us to attract and keep talent, to upkeep code. Some of those solutions are at a national scale, and they're made more powerful by consortial connections. Here, in this context, I want to focus on publishing systems. I think that this is something we're doing, again, in a very disaggregated way, and for Lyrasis to invest in publishing systems, particularly around support for Diamond OA, again, going back to Diamond OA, can make a difference for our community, can make a difference in our consortial partnerships, can make a difference for the individual institutions. And the third area is in that ebook space. So libraries have been pushed into a reactive stance with licensing for ebooks, and we know that that has caused library and reader rights to suffer. We need to grow a library-owned and managed ebook platform. That is what we're trying to do with Palace and Bibliolabs, to serve all parties well, to embrace the core values embedded in copyright, things like the doctrine of first sale, to ensure that we have greater diversity of publishing represented, to ensure that OA, open materials, get an equal footing with licensed materials, to ensure that we can introduce licensing models that are much more sensitive to the needs of libraries and readers. So 3 things there, right? So building a bridge to OA, building some scaled solutions in the technology space, particularly around publishing, and this ebook platform.
These are all great, I think, in alignment with that. The flip side of the tale of woe, some of which is around systems that don't allow us to share and innovate in the way that we need to, is that idea of how do we engage in open source as much as we're engaging in open access. For PALNI in particular, we're excited, frankly, because this has really made us step back and look differently about how we work together. And so that idea of strengthening and extending our collaboration in new ways, means somewhat aligning our business practices more than perhaps we've done in the past. Everything is changing right now, and so there is that element of evaluating what we do in individual libraries and say, what is the right scale for this work to be done in, and what is most important that we do locally in the campus and have that deeper connection to the students and the faculty and the mission of the individual institutions. As I mentioned before, PALNI shares risk, so relevance for libraries is a critical juncture here right now. There's a lot of competing technologies and opportunities that our institutions are seeing as they're getting all of the political pressure to meet their own constituents' needs. So that idea of being able to try, test, build, innovate in new systems, it's important to do that at scale. As I mentioned, PALNI's 24. We've got decent staff for the size and number of our institutions compared to a lot of other institutions, but there are a number of challenges that we don't want to take on by ourselves. And we've been very lucky in the ICULC space to find partners that can help us solve these problems. One of the big, in particular, problems, and I'll put a little plug into this, I'm in a lightning round on Friday morning, so those of you who are sticking around, I'd love for you guys to come and hear this, the Haiku for Consortia project. But PALNI had articulated a shared space for an institutional repository back in 2012, and we could get no proprietary vendors to be interested in developing such a thing. We wanted something that was multi-tenant, that we could run together, that allowed us to be nimble and agile in order to meet shared staffing needs as much as shared technology infrastructure. So PALNI has partnered with PALC, and then we've brought in other consortia as well to get a better understanding of what are the use cases and the needs, and created a really strong multi-tool. But the component of this, not only are we merging together and each of us have different skills that we bring to the table, we're leveraging one of my folks who's an archivist part-time in their institution, using Haiku in their own institution, who is also advising and onboarding and doing product development support on behalf of everybody else. So there's a level of accountability there that I have been missing in our space. So, he's not just, saying, well, we don't want to spend time and effort on that thing, I don't care about it. He's trying to use it too, and so he definitely keeps us, accountable to the needs of the institutions, while we're also trying to scale to provide it in an affordable way that these institutions did not have a place in the marketplace to do that before. The other part of that, though, is the community themselves really strongly share knowledge and expertise themselves. And so that element of creating spaces that collaboration can occur in very dynamic and fluid, powerful ways is a critical element to this. And again, people have alluded to this. There's different needs at different points in time, and you have to serve that all. Things are changing, but not in the same way at the same time. And so the structures have to hit that sweet spot of, can we align more because it's cheaper and easier to do? Sharing with each other is one way to be able to do that. So if you have really good, strong communication structures where they can do that with each other, you start to point north. We did a balanced scorecard exercise ages past where PALNI's really dived into that, of how much can we align in valuable ways, and what do we get for that? I think to speak to the point about the ROI on this kind of activity, which is always a challenge. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jill.
Thank you all very much. We wanted to make sure and leave time at the end here for interaction with you, fine folks. So please feel free to come to the microphone at the front and ask these executive directors questions you may have about their comments they've made today, or ones that you're thinking about